This is a Rogue Media Network podcast.
Coming up on the Payoff, friend of the show, Marin Nelson. We heard her story about sobriety and recovery 3 years ago when she walked us through an initiative and a movement she had started inside Salesforce, one of the biggest companies in the country, 75,000 employees. She provided an opportunity for employees who needed it, a place to go to talk about substance use disorder. Now she's doing it full time. The White House actually called her. That's, she says, when she knew it was time to branch out. She's providing these services to companies and families all over the world to help out when somebody has an issue with substance use disorder, when someone has nowhere else to turn inside the walls of the workplace. Sobrynth is the company that Marin now works for and has started, and they are moving forward, bringing solutions to addiction in the workplace. All the notes that you need to contact her are in the show notes here. My man Kevin Souza, my brother, he's first. After that, Marin Nelson. All right, Marin Nelson. She is with Sobrynth, and she has been connected with us here on the Payoff for now. Now we go back 3 years.
Yeah.
Your first appearance where we got into what happened, what it's like. No, what is it? What is it? What it was like, what happened, and what it's like now, right?
Yeah.
Sounds like I need to get to a speaker meeting. I'm Pete. I'm an alcoholic.
Hi, Pete.
So Marin, the first thing I want to do is, because I'm curious, we talked about this offline probably about a year ago about Sobrynth, and this thing is off the ground and it's taking off. Bring us into exactly what it is.
Thank you. Well, it's so good to be here. And I love that I think you were the very first podcast that I did. So kudos and thank you. When I had co-founded and was president of Soberforce at Salesforce, and that's what you and I were talking about then, which was an employee resource group that we started at Salesforce in 2020. And that group was really successful. And we had 500 employees join in 5 months to talk about sobriety, sober curiosity, sober allyship. And then following that success and podcasts like yours, a whole bunch of other sober employees at large companies started reaching out to say, how did you do that thing? I want to do it too. And so I was helping behind the scenes of other Fortune 500 companies start their sober ERGs. And that then led to the creation of Sobrynth, which we officially founded in January of this year. And the intent and the purpose behind Sobrynth is to bring substance use disorder and sober curiosity support and services to the enterprise marketplace as a benefit for employees and their families, because it is lacking, and that's in the kindest terms, what we do today as far as a benefit goes, specific to a disease that impacts 46 million Americans a year.
46 million people. Yeah, the stats you guys have on your website is amazing. 65% of workforce injuries are due to substance use disorder. 2 in 3 families are impacted. And the numbers continue at an eye-opening rate. What did, when you and I talked, I did just like you, but people were asking me for your number because they wanted to know how to do it. They were like, I need to talk to that woman you had on your show because I want to do that at my job. And can you elaborate a little bit on what exactly you were doing at Salesforce? Because it was a magical thing.
It was magical. And it does feel like informed by the universe, like this had to happen. This work was needed. So it really was the simplest. It feels so simple to me looking at it. And yet then later you go, oh, that was pretty profound because no one was having this conversation in a company the size of Salesforce, which was 75,000 people when I was there, about sobriety, right? So so what specifically we did, at this point, let's see, 2020. So I've been sober for 19 years. So I'm like, let me do the math. So I was 15 years sober when we started Soberforce, and it was during COVID, and we were watching people increase their drinking. And now we have all the stats, right? People who drink alcohol reported drinking 30% more during COVID. Overdoses were on the rise, and wine was starting to get shipped to people's homes for virtual wine tastings with customers. And so for someone in recovery who could navigate how to leave a happy hour without anyone asking a question or not being a big deal, it's really different when the why and what the heck are you supposed to say as far as why you can't be at that event, except for to out myself, which I didn't have. For me, was not a problem, but I started thinking about, what about the person who's newly sober or trying not to drink right now, or right? And like, how do they navigate it? So it was a recognition of like, we need to have a conversation in the workplace to make it safe to be sober, to raise awareness collectively that there are 21 million of us in recovery in the United States. And there's a lot more people who don't drink for other reasons. And to facilitate an earlier access out of substance use. Like we wait too long. We wait till it's a clinical crisis today to intervene, right? There's not like, I just went to the doctor yesterday and they pull my blood to see, take a blood sample to see if I'm at risk for diabetes or hypertension, right? There isn't that for substance use disorder. It's all self-reported data. So we have this accelerating crisis happening. COVID was a perfect storm with isolation and anxiety. And so we created this group because we're like, we have to facilitate a conversation, period. And it worked. Turns out 500 people publicly wanted to be in the conversation with us.
And so now we're at Sobrynth, where you're like almost a hub, right? Where people can come for these types of services.
So what Sobrynth does is we are a benefit that we sell to the HR team, and we sell it for all employees because we are anonymous and we are free for the employee to use our services. We provide two key functions. So one half is the cultural change to create recovery-friendly workplaces. So I'm just going to pause and give context. Last year, in November 2023, the Office of National Drug Control and Policy created the Recovery Ready Workplace Toolkit. It's 140 pages. It's available online. And it's the call and an ask of the public and private employer sector to create recovery-ready workplaces because of those reasons I just said, right? 70% of the 46 million are working. That means roughly 1 in 10 employees have untreated substance use disorder. So the federal government's like, hey, employers, we need your help. And what they outline in it is how to change culture. So half of our offering is, how do you do this? Because that's a big ask of an HR team to try to figure out how to do on their own. So we walk them through how to change culture to be recovery ready. And then the other half of our solution is 24/7, 365 care navigation and peer coaching. So people who are answering the phone have at least a year of recovery and have gone through 46 hours of training and can meet you where you are with your sober goals. So like for me, when I got sober at 24, I went to a treatment facility to get assessed because that's what I was told to do. And the licensed alcohol drug counselor did my assessment. And they're like, you need to go to inpatient. And I said, I'm not going to go to inpatient. And they said, well, then you at least have to go to outpatient. I said, I'm not willing to go to outpatient. I'm not leaving my job. And they're like, well, then you're going to drink. And I'm like, that's literally the only options, inpatient or outpatient. I'm like, what about AA? They're like, well, no, you need outpatient. And I'm like, watch me. So for me, in my own stubbornness, those weren't pathways I was willing to take, but I was looking for a solution. And luckily, I had family examples of staying sober through 12 steps. And that worked for me. And I've sustained my recovery for 19 years. So our goal at Sobrynth is to meet employees and families where they are with their goals and their willingness to celebrate all of that. There is not one pathway, and to help plug them into local resources.
How are you getting in with these companies that you're providing services to? Like, how do you find yourself approaching HR people, or are they coming to you?
So it's been really humbling and empowering as someone in recovery that I am finding myself, and we are finding ourselves being brought in by other sober employees. So literally every single conversation and every customer that we're working with has been the result of a sober employee who hears a podcast like this, finds me on LinkedIn. So I welcome anyone listening who wants to talk to find me on LinkedIn. And
we'll put that information
and setting up the meeting with our HR team. And like, what more powerful Say that again?
No, I said we'll put that information in the show notes, your LinkedIn and how people can get in touch with you if they're listening to this right now
Okay.
and they want to take advantage of these services.
Yeah, perfect. And it's like, what more powerful than the testimonies that people are willing to give when they bring us to HR and they say, here's my story. And oh, by the way, once I got sober, I made President's Club and I'm one of your top earners in this company.
Yeah.
It's like, what? It's the best. It's the most amazing. I just have to show up and talk about the details of what we do. But like, they've already done the why this matters, right? It's like right there. There's your ROI. This person was not sober, never hit quota, got sober, has hit quota every year since, and is one of your top earners. And that story is not unique. I see it all the time. So I have this whole kick of like sober sellers sell better, wink, wink. But it is like, it's a trend line. And I want to study it more because there's something there.
Yeah, it's funny. We talk about this in 12-step meetings and AA, and like it's in the literature. Like, look, there's a movement and a lot of energy behind, hey, like an alcoholic that gets sober is extremely effective in the business work environment. There is a lot to offer there. Because not only one, have you quote unquote old school, like put the plug in the jug, but now you have this, like I said, sober as in like working a program. You've got this list of, you have a code that you live by, which not everybody has a code. I sure as hell didn't. And some days I still don't, right? I mean, I have to, every day it's like another opportunity to plug back into my recovery. But when I'm on it, I'm pretty effective. And for you to be able to go into these environments, these major companies at Sobrynth and open them up to this possibility, you can take their productivity to a whole nother level.
Thank you. I mean, really, truly, like it is exactly what you said. It's like those of us in recovery have a second chance at life and do bring a lot of energy, I think, to our roles, right? And a lot of gratitude. And that directly impacts the way that I deliver for a company, my results. And it's not unique to me or to you. It's, I think, a shared theme among the 21 million of us. The other thing that's been fascinating to hear are like the stories of, I think about like the before and after stories of recovery ready workplaces. So before we had Sober Force and I'd go to company kickoff or a sales event, there was often just the champagne toast and then maybe some bottles of water. And then after Sober Force and working with the events and marketing team, when I went to company kickoff, there was champagne and then non-alcoholic sparkling juice in the same champagne glass, clearly labeled. And for the first time in my career, I got to toast to company kickoff with my colleagues. And that because it told me that someone in the events team took the time to think about how to be inclusive to people like me. And that literally is the difference between someone staying sober or not. Is like, do I have choice in this moment? Or am I just picking up the drink, right? Yeah. And so also like the other part that's been really interesting is like how many people just choose not to, like this rise of choosing not to drink. So the stats this year are like 41% of people plan to drink less this year than last year. And so there's also this growing trend, especially among younger generations who just don't want things centered on alcohol. And so again, this is just about choice. And we're not here to steal anyone's drink out of their hand, but let's give choice to people. And I think corporate America has a long ways to catch up. Like it still defaults to alcohol as the event. Yeah,
I wanted to ask you that. How prevalent still in the workplace today, as we talk about a lot of these numbers and they are what they are. And at some point they were impacted by COVID and that certainly has moved the needle even more in that direction. But hey, let's face it, like any company event I go to or dinner, I can really identify to what you talked about. I've been sober for 13 years in November, God willing, right? And that is something I'm comfortable with. Not everybody is comfortable with that. You're going out to a dinner where you already might be anxious because you don't know a lot of these people, or you're eating with your boss, and what's better than a drink to take the edge off? And there usually aren't options. Am I right? Like, we're still seeing that in the public domain, that really it's still based around alcohol, a lot of the social engagement.
Very, very much so. Yes. I will say though, if you look at like the congrats, by the way, on your upcoming anniversary.
Thank you.
Next month. But if you look at, go to any good restaurant, like it's weird to not see a mocktail menu.
Yeah.
So it is starting to become a lot more mainstream, and the NA sales are increasing. I heard a stat that I haven't vetted, so maybe check it out. But I heard a stat that alcohol sales were down 9% year over year. So there is definitely people opting out of, and again, not necessarily because they have substance use disorder, but because of all of the research and the health implications of drinking alcohol that are coming out. And that's really cool to me, because I think because the stigma is so great, we have to just normalize choosing not to, for whatever the reason is. And I think that gives permission to people to opt out sooner if they aren't afraid of being labeled, because there's still such a stigma around the label of being in recovery. And I claim it because I think it's important to claim these stories out loud. Clearly you do too with your podcast. It matters to have representation, but a lot of people still hide and don't want to be labeled. So like, what if we just make it normal to just like choose not to?
Yeah. Your story is a very interesting one. You grew up, did you grow up in Minnesota?
Yeah.
So you grew up in Minnesota. When did you have your first drink?
14. Like all good alcoholics.
Yeah. and what happened to you after you started to drink? After that, I tell people that was my first spiritual experience. When I drank around 13 years old, it completely changed my life. It was this gift, this nectar of the gods. And what it did do, and I didn't notice it, was anything productive I was doing that I was really dedicated to, all of a sudden that was moved out to the fringes. And this was my number one thing.
Yeah. What was your first drink?
My first drink was a bunch of Busch Lights. I rammed down my throat, and then I got sick. And I didn't drink again for like a couple years, because this was like 5th grade. And then I remember drinking bottled beer at a park with my buddies when I was a freshman in high school. And I remember thinking like, wow, this is really working. Like, I'm having a lot of fun. I'm talking to girls. I usually don't do that. Of course, right away I started telling tall tales and bullshitting everybody. But it worked, it worked so much that it eventually didn't,
Exactly. I actually, when I tell my story, I'm like, it probably is the thing that saved me from dying by suicide for a stretch of years there. Like, it was the thing that kept my other mental health with anxiety at bay, because it worked to alleviate that hamster on the wheel in my brain. And like, my first drink was a very sophisticated Zima in a parking lot in Minnesota at 14.
Yes.
And I think there were some Newport Lights involved. So, and it was the same thing you described, where it was like, where have you been all of my life?
Yeah.
Because for the first time, I didn't feel this overwhelming self-conscious, self-doubt voice in my head. It just went away. And I was just comfortable in my own skin. And I'm like, well, thank God. This is what living is. And then I planned everything around when could I get that drink next. And to your point,
that's exactly what happened to me. Everything, it became, and the scariest part looking back on this, and people who are still drinking today and listening to this maybe can relate, but it's like, you don't even know that that's happening. Like, alcohol came to the forefront of my life. It was really my number one priority. And I didn't even notice it, that I was pushing everything. It was just happening.
Yeah. I think I did in 9th grade, but I think the only reason why I did, because I remember a moment in the hallway when I threw an epic party, and now I'm like, oh my God, now as a mother, I'm like, that is horrifying. Like, I was so young and I had so many drunk kids in my house, and I was 14.
Yeah.
And I got busted. My mom came home. It was a very epic situation. There was a snowstorm. The plane didn't land. She thought someone was breaking into her house when she got home. It was actually just a bunch of drunk 14. It was a disaster. And I got grounded for a long time. I remember thinking, like, I can't wait to do it again. And then someone was like, oh my gosh, I would never, like, you got so many, you have to do so many things. You got so, like, this is so bad. And I would like, it didn't matter. I was like, I will go to whatever lengths I need to go to have to feel that again.
What on the way down, you know, like before you got sober, what were some of the consequences or some of the, I always mention like, or actually a friend of mine told me this before I got sober, that I was walking through doors, you know, that I couldn't walk back through. You know, for me, that's a lot of alcohol and drugs and behaviors that ultimately led to consequences that got me sober. What were some of the things that moved you to make that change where you get that advice that you can go to inpatient or outpatient or that's it, or you drink again?
Yeah. I was living in New York, and because I grew up with a dad in recovery and uncles in recovery, I was really conscious from the get to not let my outside show what was going on. And had I kept drinking, I would have not been able to control that. But because I was barely holding on by my fingertips, right? Like I was showing up hungover at work all the time. So that I felt physically sick every day. I was definitely someone who vomited from alcohol poisoning regularly. So I was constantly sick in a state of being hungover and detoxing. And that didn't align with my sense of values and self of being a hard worker and someone who produces and got really good grades in school. And I could feel that my performance was slipping. I made really terrible choices with men and put myself in situations that were humiliating and lacking self-love because I didn't have choice when I was in an inebriated state. And so I'd put myself in really dangerous situations, and I'd wake up going, oh my God, that could have been really bad. Right. I remember, oh my gosh, I used to program my address into my phone. I programmed my address into my phone with under my name because I knew that when I got drunk, I would forget where I lived. And so I'd get into the cab, and before I could hit the seat, I'd have to say my address because I knew once I hit the seat, I'd be passed out. I mean, just like horrifying, horrifying. And here I was thinking like, God, I'm such a good planner. I'm so on it that I know to plan my address in my phone. Like I didn't think like it's a problem that you forget your address every night you go out.
How about something, I swear, the more I talk to other alcoholics about recovery, like you mentioned throwing up because of alcohol poisoning, like it's almost laughable. Like it is now that I'm sober, but like you drink to the point where you're poisoned and you get sick. Like, and then you do it again. Like you poison yourself. Like, it's like, I mean, like it's called alcohol poisoning. We are drinking poison to the point where our body totally rejects it and it's business as usual. Like that's insane.
Yeah. There are too many nights where I throw up in the bar and then go back out and order another shot. I mean, it's just insane. It is insane. Yeah. And so now like to see, so that for me, like the outsides, when I say the outsides looked manageable, meaning I was employed, my rent was paid, I had a boyfriend, like I had, you know, and I drank with different groups. So no group knew how much I was drinking.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And so, but on the inside, I was miserable and I was suicidally depressed at the very end because I couldn't stop. And I knew at my deepest level, I couldn't stop because I'd come up with different plans around drinking less, like, oh, I'll get high before I go out this time. And then I'd end up even more drunk, you know, or I'm going to just get one bottle. And then anyway, it's just all of the amount of thinking energy that went into it. Like, when am I going to start? When do I have to stop by to be able to get up for work? How much money do I have? Like, who am I going out with tonight? Who's the last 19 years is the biggest gift because none of the things I have in my life would have existed if I kept drinking.
So when you go to recovery, like what starts to happen for you? Like what are some of the things that starts to change, and what are you doing that affects that change?
That's a really good question. It was getting plugged in pathways to recovery. I'm grateful that 12-step works for me because it's really easy to find and we're everywhere and it's free, and any community I've lived in, I can get plugged into. And like, that's such a gift, right? Of a group of people who are just trying to live better, do better, be better, and be connected together while we do it, like, is such a gift. So it was really showing up and getting plugged in right away. And my first sponsor said to build self-esteem, because like many who, get sober, I had really low self-esteem and a lot of shame. And she said to build self-esteem, you do esteemable acts. So that means you get here early and you make coffee, you set up chairs. And that was super profound to me because that did work. It's like I needed a job to give me purpose.
That's it.
Right?
Major league. I mean, that totally changed everything about me. I got to a recovery house. I didn't want to work. I thought it was too good to have a bullshit job. I ended up getting a fast food job at Kentucky Fried Chicken. And that job really, looking back on it, like changed my life because I didn't know how to do any of the stuff at the job when I got there. And by the time I left, I was like the master of the domain over there. I was management material. I was working the register, working the drive-through at the same time, making the double decker and getting the 2-piece. And that did amazing shit for my confidence and my brain. And it was rewiring those like neural pathways that we use to move towards success.
Yes. I love talking about neural pathways and rewiring and doing the repeatable acts to like set up new frameworks in our brain, because the pathways I walked in with were pretty broken or not helpful.
Yeah.
The other one I heard was like, stick in the middle of the pack. So don't be alone. So that meant for me in early recovery, I really spent very little time alone because that's when I would pick up and use. So it meant I went to my work, I went to a meeting after work, I hung out with the people after the meeting until I had to go to bed. And like, I did that for the first year minimum, maybe first 3 years. Another one that sticks with me that I think about is like, my ego wants to think I'm better than you or wants me to think I'm worse than you. But to, ask the universe to help me feel a part of and be one of you, whether that's help me be a good worker or a good friend or a good, daughter today. Like my disease of addiction wants me to be separate from. And that means thinking I'm better than or worse than, but never that I'm one of. And so I still, even 19 years, have to think a lot about that. Like where I do best is with my feet planted on the ground and in the middle of a pack and remembering that I am the same as, and, sobriety's changed my whole life. Like it just is, it's pretty wild when when you've been doing this for a long time, you can forget, but I love the moments like this to stop and be like, wow, like literally, like I would not, I probably would just physically wouldn't be in this earth if I was still using.
We were talking earlier about, and this goes back to Sobrynth and, how folks that get sober and how effective they can be in society, at work, at home. And I've frequently, people that get close to me will be like, okay, why are you this way? This is when I'm on with, and I'm in the middle of the pack, like where do you get this energy? Where do you get this perspective? And I'm like, it's because I'm sober, and because I work a program. And then they're always, I love the cat, by the way. I love it. So then they're always like, okay, well, I know that, but what really is it? I'm like, no. You don't get it. Like, that's what it is. Like, I swear, like I've had many people, especially coworkers, being like, all right, like what really is it? I'm like, that's what it is. Like, it's that powerful. And it almost feels, and that's when I start to realize what a gift it is, because not everybody has access to it. And to get access to it, I had to be a fall down alcoholic who was going to be granted the gift of desperation. I am not smart enough or disciplined enough to map something like this out. I'm not. It's just not in my nature. I'm not.
No, exactly.
Yeah. But because I got this gift, I have this code. We talked about these 12 steps that keep me disciplined, keep me motivated, and make me the kind of person that hopefully other people want to be around, you know? And so, and that's what this Sobrynth really sounds like. It can grant, you know, a major conglomerate, an employer of people. Now, I wanted to ask you your services, like when someone comes in and they say, we want to use you, I imagine there's many different ways that they can utilize your services, right? Like, can you give me like a kind of an example or scale as to like the lowest, you know, tier and the highest?
That's a really good question. It is truly like the same for everyone. It's more of like, do you want to roll this out to 100% of your employees, or do you want to pilot it with a subset?
Okay.
So with the companies that we're live with right now, we are for 100% of their employees, because our service is anonymous and free for the employee, because it's paid for by the employer. It has to be then offered to everyone. And we don't separate our services because we're so passionate about the cultural change component that we actually won't let employers buy from us just a 24/7, 365 direct dedicated phone line for care navigation if they're not also willing to do the cultural change.
Okay.
And the reason why is because if it is not a recovery-friendly workplace culture, then you're buying a benefit for no one to use it, because no one's going to feel safe that they can actually call that phone number.
Okay. Yeah.
And we know that the only way to really change this and to really support people who are in recovery is to have companies agree to, and it's not a huge lift we're asking. It really isn't. It's more like, how do you talk about it from the HR team? How do you find an executive sponsor who's in recovery who will name their story to smash stigma? That's a huge indicator of people being willing to ask for help, is when a senior leader says, I'm one of those people in recovery.
Yeah.
You know, how do you teach people leaders how to talk to their teams about it? There's a survey by Forrest Marsh that came out that says direct managers naming to their direct employees that they are safe to ask for help for substance use disorder or sober support is the number one indicator of employees seeking help. It's not from the CEO saying something, it's from your direct line manager.
Yeah.
So that means that part of our service is teaching these direct line managers what to say, where to say it, how to say it, and how to point people to us. And it works. And then we see it work. People call us. My manager told me about you. I can't stop drinking, but I can't go to inpatient because I'm a caretaker. So I can't actually leave home when I'm not at work. What do I do? And we're able to guide them to local resources that are available.
So what does that entail? Like, hey, there's a recovery meeting here. And then you're there also, like you mentioned, you've got folks who are trained to talk to these individuals.
That's right. So it's setting up a sober goal. It's informed by certified peer coaching, which has been a program that's been used for 15 years in the Medicaid space. We just haven't brought it to the general population yet, and that's what we're aiming to do. It's an amazing model. It's like, what a difference. You and I know it, right, from the 12-step rooms, but the person who can talk to me about how to stay sober is someone who's done it themselves. It's not a general person at a call center, right? I want to know that you've done it if you're going to tell me how to do this.
Yeah.
And that's what we're doing, is we're arming, you know, a staff of peer coaches who can work with individuals on their own goals. And yes, that means helping someone find a virtual AA meeting happening that night in their community that they can attend while also taking care of their family member at home, right? Or a smart recovery program.
How about when you're at Salesforce and this thing, you know, because our buddy, you know, guy who I consider like family, Connor Marsden, reached out to me. He knew my story because Connor was one of the guys who had really kind of like, because you got to protect yourself, like kind of given up on me. I knew him through Richmond and the Richmond football team, and we got extremely close. I think I got 1 or 2 DUIs in Connor's cars. I mean, that's a fact, you know, like 2 accidents, right? Connor was he still is a very generous, giving person and a very patient man. So anyways, I talked to Connor. He's like, I got this woman, Marin, she's crushing it. She's doing so much good within Salesforce with this recovery opportunity for folks. When was the moment you knew that this thing was so big that you needed to kind of take it on the road and branch out?
When the White House called last summer. I thought it was a scam. I did some research and I was like, oh no, this is This is a real person who's in the Office of Recovery in the executive branch of the White House, who was working on this recovery ready workplace toolkit with the Office of National Drug Control Policy, and knew of the work we had done with Soberforce and wanted to talk about it. And I was like, okay, all right, universe, I get it. I get it. This is a need. No one else has done this. And we got to solve it. We need to solve it. Full stop. Now I'm just like, I'm so fueled by this passion of like, it's just unacceptable that we've gotten to a place where 1 in 10 employees are actively sick with untreated substance use disorder. And we don't have a ton of benefits for this. Like, we have a benefit for everything else. How do we not have a benefit for what is the underlying cause of untreated diabetes and uncontrolled heart disease and cancer rates? New York Times, I don't know if you saw, New York Times had an article just 2 weeks ago about the linkage between young cancers and the acceleration of young cancers, colorectal, breast, in our generation with moderate drinking. And moderate drinking is 1 or fewer a day for women. 2
I heard
or
about
fewer
this.
a day.
Yeah. I didn't read it, but I heard about this story. Yeah.
I mean, that is wild. If I was drinking 1 or less a day, I would have been like, I have no problem. I am fine.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Okay. That would have been like a very controlled situation for me.
Yeah, that was the lie. Oh no, it's just 1 or 2. Yeah.
1 or less. I was saying I was drinking 3 or less and thought that was a symbol I was fine.
Yeah.
I mean, so I think that the data just is, so anyway, so that was the moment that led me to go, all right, I got to do that. It really felt like I couldn't not do it. Like trying to solve this problem from this angle, because it just is too many people suffering in silence, and we can do better. It's not, like, this is a model that's been used for other disease management programs. We just haven't applied it to substance use disorder.
Yeah. All right. So tell me about Sobrynth. How can people find it? How can they reach out to you? I love the cat.
It's a dog, actually, in defense of Roscoe.
Roscoe.
He's a very small dog. I'm going to let him out this door.
Yeah. Sure. When they go to the door, that's it.
Roscoe is cat-like. It is true.
He's a little dog. I thought he was a cat.
He kind of looks like a cat. He acts like a cat too. Okay, so how can they find us? So find us Sobrynth, Sobrynth. Sober Labyrinth is the origin of that name. On LinkedIn. Find me on LinkedIn. Message us, follow us. Like, we want to talk to every single employer to help reach employees and their families. We just don't want people to be alone on this journey, like. There's a lot of parents out there who are freaked out about their teenagers and don't know what to do and how to have a conversation and what resources right. And they're super distracted in the workplace.
So you guys, so you'll help families and stuff?
Yes.
Or is that okay?
Yeah. So employees and families. So both the families of the employee, but then also the employee as the family member, or as the friend, right? So, I mean, you look at like the amount of time people are spending trying to research this on their own and not knowing where to go and not knowing how to start and how to evaluate which place is the right place for them. And we would hear all those stories within the Soberforce community of moms who are like, I'm spending 5 hours a day trying to figure out the right treatment center for my teenage daughter. And I'm so overwhelmed. I have no idea what to do.
Yeah.
Well, people don't need to be alone on this.
It occurs to me, and you were lucky to have this, and so was I, because I had a brother and a really good friend who was sober. But your father, right? Your uncles, like,
that's right.
That's almost like what you're bringing to people. You had that baked in. Like, you had someone who you saw the change, like you saw that difference, like they were there to tell you their story. I'm honestly, we talk about all these numbers, 46 million Americans suffer from substance use disorder, but like there aren't as many folks recovering out loud for them to know that recovery is an option.
Exactly.
So you're bringing this to them, which is like so cool that you're mobilizing and bringing folks that have stories to people who need to hear them, because they're not always baked in like they were for you or I.
100%. And I'm so glad you picked up on that, because literally when we started this, I would talk about how I wanted to be the brother and the uncle and the dad, right? To show employees that there is another way if they choose it, that there is another path, that they can get help, and that we're on the journey with them. They're not alone in this, because exactly to your point, you and I had lived experiences to show us how. And there are so many people who still like this, and I can't remember the stat now off the top of my head, but it was a massive percentage of people who still think that AA costs money, for example.
Yeah.
And a lot of that is because, and by the way, it's free for anyone listening. Yeah. But a lot of that is because of the not seventh tradition. That's
seventh tradition. Yeah. That's it.
Is of the tradition of anonymity. Yeah. And anyways, that's a whole other separate podcast. But I actually think that like that, I respect when people choose to stay anonymous, but I also really, really encourage people to live their recovery out loud, because we recover through each other's stories. And the only reason why I knew where the doorway of AA was because of my dad and my uncles. And if they hadn't shared their recovery with me, I probably would have gone on drinking for a lot longer.
Yeah.
You know, and for them, they didn't get sober till they were in their 40s. And I was lucky to get sober in my 20s. And my hope is for my kids that they're going to be armed with tools where they're not going to have to go down this family path.
Yeah.
Right. But to break that cycle sooner is the goal.
Yeah. I mean, that's why I started this podcast, because it felt good to share my story, right? It helps me. And also because that's how I got sober. Like I wasn't ready to go to a meeting. I certainly wasn't ready to go to treatment, but I would see like celebrities or read about notable people who had gotten sober who were sharing their story. And I was like, wow, like they struggle with this. And now I see them like this. Like it was a whole stew, but that was a big part of it. Like people that were recovering out loud. I could see it, and it was super important. So anyways, thank you so much, Marin. I'm so happy we linked back up again. It does. It kind of warms my heart. I love how these threads, right, that come through our sobriety can weave in and out. And it seems like not a day has gone by.
I know. I love it. Thank you.
Anything else you want to say? Anything else like about Sobrynth and all the good stuff you're doing?
Just to say that, our hope is that recovery-friendly workplaces become the norm and not the outlier. And I hope one day what we're doing, it's not considered like groundbreaking and trailblazing. I hope it's just considered table stakes benefits. So would love for anyone listening who wants to be part of this change to reach out and help make it happen in your workplace too.
All right, we're going to put all that in the show notes. If you want to talk to Marin, make sure you reach out to her. Again, we'll have the link down there. All right, Marin Nelson, thank you so much for what you're doing.
Thanks, Pete. Great to be here.
Thanks so much for listening to The Payoff with Pete. Once again, I'm Pete Souza. And of course, we are part of the Rogue Media Network. All kinds of good podcasts you can find at roguemedianetwork.com. And of course, you can find this podcast and all those other ones wherever you get your podcasts, iTunes, Spotify, other spots like that.
This has been a Rogue Media Network production. Are you a podcaster? Let's talk podcast hosting. Are you tired of your current podcast host? Need real support in a community that gets it? At Rogue Media Network, we offer top-tier podcast hosting services to help you thrive. From hosting and distribution to dedicated support, we've got you covered. Starting as low as $25 a month. Join our community of passionate podcasters today. Contact us at hello@roguemedianetwork.com.